Welcome to Rails, Ales, and Old Towns. If you traveled Europe in the 90s or early 2000s, there's a good chance you remember a version of travel that felt just a little different. No scrolling, more wandering, fewer reservations, and lots more spontaneous fun. Well, on today's show, we're going back. My guest is Danielle Oteri, an art historian, writer, podcaster, and travel advisor focused on Italy. She recently authored an article called The Before Sunrise Generation, a piece that struck a chord with travelers everywhere for its plea to travel a little more like we used to. On the show, Danielle and I talk about her early adventures around Europe, the inspiration behind the article, and what the beloved Before Sunrise films can still teach us about curiosity, connection, and embracing the unexpected in Europe. Okay, so yeah, if you've never seen the films, feel free to go watch them now. I promise we'll be here when you get back. We also get into her advice for traveling Italy today, including why sometimes the best experiences happen when you stop obsessing over checklists and just embrace the here and now. All right, let's go back to Europe.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
Welcome to Rails, Ales, and Old Towns. Danielle Oteri, a travel advisor who focuses on all things Italy, who also has an Italy-focused podcast and Substack.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
I was inspired to get in touch with you by this wonderful article you wrote called The Before Sunrise Generation, where you weaved in a lot of themes that are currently important in European travel back to the movie Before Sunrise from the 90s. This is going to be a bit of a different episode. We're going to talk about the movie. We're going to talk about that article and talk about Italian adventures that you make possible for people. Why do you think this movie resonates so deeply with people?
It's really now catching on, or that this article that I wrote, I actually wrote the article in 2022, and it just took off recently. And it's been like every time I open my email, there's like 30 more people who have liked it or restacked it on Substack. And part of it is just timely. Here in the US, there's a mini series on about the love affair between Carolyn Bessette and JFK Jr. And a lot of Gen Zs are watching it saying, wow, the 90s looked so amazing. You just went out, you met your friends, you weren't tracking them on social media. Everything was in the present tense. So I think that's part of what sparked it, is like a general, 90s zeitgeist that's going around the internet. But I think also we're realizing that really was a fantastic time. It legitimately was. It's not just nostalgia. It was a fantastic moment. And we're, I think, reckoning with what was lost.
So are you saying that you've gone viral?
I don't know what constitutes viral, but viral for me, yes, much more so than my stuff, much more reach than I normally get. Let's put it that way.
I guess viral is relative.
Yeah, for sure. For somebody who writes about history, for me, it's viral, yes.
Okay, all right. There was that stretch there of like, I guess we're going to say, the early 90s, there was a bit of a mini recession. Obviously, we got over that. But then you had that zone that led from there to, we'll go call it 9/11. We'll say that was the end of the 90s. 90s really didn't end until 9/11, we'll say.
I agree. And specifically on that date, yes.
Yeah, literally. So you had that run there from like 92, 93. Kind of ties into Europe, actually, because that Berlin Wall falling, it just created this positive flow. It was great days. It was.
Was. And I got to do both high school and college entirely in the 90s. So I feel like, that scene in Indiana Jones where he grabs his hat, pulls it out before the trapdoor closes on him. I got to have my, the best years, the fillet of my youth, all in the 90s.
I am of this exact same generation. Gosh, it was good. Yeah.
It was a good time. There was still a little grit left over from the 80s that made things interesting, but there was a lot of optimism in the world. A lot of things were changing for the better in that moment.
So we'll circle back to the movie. So do you remember when the first time you saw it? And
I think I saw it, shortly after it came out. I don't remember watching it in the theater, but I feel like I rented it at Blockbuster, right after it was released on video, and was just, I mean, so right up my alley. I was the bookish girl that wanted to meet Jesse on the train so badly. So I was right in the crosshairs of the demographics for that movie.
so when they did the focus groups, you were the person.
Absolutely.
Now, had you been to Europe before you'd seen that movie?
No, I hadn't. I probably saw it, yeah, maybe a year before I actually did travel for the first time.
So would you say it was kind of an inspiration, or?
It was in there. I mean, I had a lot of friends. I knew a lot of people that were traveling. I wanted to travel immediately right after I graduated high school. I grew up in suburban New York in a really overprotective Italian American household. So I was just, thirsting for my freedom. I was just at that point, I think, very aware of trying to put together a trip and saving money for a trip.
You didn't know what it looked like, but it was going to happen.
It was going to happen. It was going to involve trains. It was going to involve one of those enormous backpacks that, went like slightly above your head that nobody has anymore, but everybody under the age of 25 had back then. I remember going to the camping supply store to buy that. I don't camp, so that was a specific destination to get that backpack. I knew that the travel was going to be cheap and it was going to be in hostels and was going to be about rambling around and meeting people. Absolutely.
Yeah, no, it's like, because I would tell people, I'm like, oh, I'm going backpacking. Like, oh, you're outdoorsy. I'm like, oh, no, I'm just walking around Paris with a backpack.
Right. Yeah.
I think what you're talking about is people would have you'd see the hardcore people, it seemed, having the mats, like a sleeping mat rolled up at the top of the backpack.
Yeah, no, I wasn't that hardcore, but I did have the backpack that was, more than half of my height. It was like carrying around a body around on my back. Yes.
So let's get into, a little bit about when you make it to Europe. When you make it to Europe and you've got your backpack, what do those trips look like?
I remember so distinctly turning the corner at the airport, my parents dropping me off at JFK Airport, and just going to a point beyond security where they could no longer reach me physically or yell, and the incredible feeling of freedom that just came over me, where I just felt like I am starting my life. I was walking in, I was Dorothy in Wizard of Oz when the Technicolor comes on. I just felt so incredibly free. And I felt like that throughout my trips, and I don't have the same sense of it anymore just because I've traveled so much. But at that time, I was so completely open and present to whatever was in front of me, which was fantastic. And I was just aware too, because I had a finite amount of time to travel, that wherever I was, it was like, oh my God, I'm in Paris, I'm in London, I'm in wherever, and wanted to just take in every aspect of it. So yeah, not letting myself get bothered by things that didn't work out. My standards were pretty low. I was traveling on a student's budget, but I was a sponge. I was completely open to everything. And again, in that moment in the 90s, I mean, things were pretty safe, and it was just very easy to talk to people. And it was like, if you were a backpacker, you had on this kind of Wi-Fi, human Wi-Fi, where, if you heard English, you would just start talking to people. And it was like there was a world within all of these other worlds that you could cling to if you needed to.
So what were these early trips like? Were these summers? Was this 6 weeks? Was this in between on other sides of studying?
The very first trip I did was a month-long painting class in Italy. It was part of the university program that I was doing. And I was not in the fine arts department, but I had a friend who just said, hey, they're running this program over the summer in Florence. It's really inexpensive. We could just take this class. And the classes were only like 3 hours a day, 4 days a week, with lots of time, obviously, to just explore and travel. So that was my first trip. And every weekend, on Thursday night, we would leave, me and the group of friends that I met there, and, went to Venice one weekend, went to Rome one weekend, bouncing around Tuscany. We did all sorts of fun things. And then after that, I was completely hooked. And then, yes, it was usually either breaks or summers, I spent a lot of time in France. I went to the UK, went to Scotland, which was fantastic, Malta. And at some point, I had this idea that I was going to just check off every country. But, what worked out is the kind of traveler I am, which is when I fall in love with a place, I just want to go deeper and deeper and deeper. So I really spend most of my time traveling in Italy and France.
Any stories from backpacking back in the days?
I mean, it's what's interesting to me is like, I think back on them as just how, just so many of these like random conversations that I had with so many random people, just none of these things would ever happen again. And I'm so grateful. I'm not like a deeply nostalgic person, even though I'm a historian. Like I don't like when people get so bogged down in like, oh, the past was so much better. No, it sucks. It's like, well, that's a great way to make your life terrible. But at the same time, there's so many things that just couldn't happen again because we're all just like way too connected to our phones. I remember going in Naples and meeting some Australian chef at a youth hostel and going to the fish market with him and how fun it was because he was just so excited about everything that he saw. And it was just amazing to kind of watch a chef experiencing this market in Naples where like this, the fish was like out on the street. That was really cool. There was a lot of places like Vienna that I still want to travel because I met other backpackers who were talking about how great they were. There was this one guy I remember talking about Sofia, the city of Sofia in Bulgaria, another place I still haven't been, and he was just in love with it. And the way he was talking about it, his eyes were lighting up. He's like, so beautiful, you have to go.
Now, I've got a confession to make regarding this movie because I didn't see it until the 2010s.
Oh, wow.
And that was part of the reason why I wanted to talk to you too, is I feel like I got in at the last moment of this era of European travel. I didn't go to Europe until 2006, but in a way that would seem like the last vestiges of this. And I am certain that people recommended this movie to me and mentioned it, but I had my wires crossed because the name, I thought it was like a vampire movie. And so I was confused and I was like, oh yeah, okay, vampires in Vienna. No, I'm not interested in that. And it wasn't until like the early 2010s when that Before Midnight was coming out and I kind of discovered this trilogy, and I'd always been a fan of some of Richard Linklater's films. And then I did the homework on it. And then I watched it. I'm like, oh yeah, I can see why people loved this.
Well, yeah, 2006, I guess, really was the last of that because 2007 is when the iPhone comes out. And it was a couple of years before smartphones were ubiquitous everywhere. The iPhone at first was like really expensive and kind of limited. But then Airbnb and social media and everything else that comes along with our phones now is really what changed this world completely.
Yeah, it was like a trickle and then a flood. So like, what are some of your favorite parts of the movie?
That there's like not a plot, that they're just wandering around and talking, and the romance is not manufactured. He doesn't run back to her in the rain as she's about to get on the train for Paris. And, it just felt very natural. The actors felt very natural. They didn't have a bunch of makeup on. Everything about it just felt like real life and an idealized version of real life in that you hope for those connections. And there's a line in the movie also that says something to the effect of, you think you're going to have lots of connections like this throughout your life. And then you find out you don't. And that actually might be in the second movie, that might be in Before Sunset. And it's true that when you're young, you just think like, I've got so many experiences ahead of me. And you do, but not as many of them are going to be as special as the one that they captured in that movie. And if you get to have a few of those in your lifetime, you're pretty lucky.
But yeah, there's a lot of little things done right there, I noticed last night, like when they're in Vienna and they're on the bridge and they're talking to the guys about their play. Ethan Hawke, like, his shirt's wrinkled and this happens all the time. You're like, oh, I'll take a flyer. Like, we're going to do that. I think it was in the park towards the end when they say, oh, we never went to those guys' play. And that always happens on these trips.
Yeah, well, you always start off with a million. You want to do everything. You want to eat everything. You want to see everything. But then you confront your human body somewhere in the middle of the trip and you say, I need to go to sleep.
Any other moments that you remember from the film that stick with you?
I think the second film is the one that I loved even more because it just showed these people that had this rhythm just pick it up where it was left off. And it's a similar movie with a similar catharsis at the end, but then it goes in a different direction. It's just this idea that two people can connect without necessarily knowing anything about each other. But if you put them in the right setting where they're both unfamiliar with the place where they are, they will then connect with each other.
I appreciated the first scene in the movie is of rail travel. And, that fact that their whole bonding and it happens in the dining car with those lights, those like just romantic, bulbous dining car lights, which there are still a few of those knocking around.
But that conversation that they had is, partially thanks to the fact that they weren't just staring at their phones and texting with their friends.
So I've never had any romance on a train going to Vienna, but I actually, coincidentally, I think this is part of the reason why I like that film so much. I was going to Budapest, but I had to change in Vienna, and I'd gotten on the train and probably had my Let's Go guidebook out, was looking at it, struck up a conversation with a guy who was from Baltimore, and we hit it off. I'm a big ice hockey fan, big NHL fan. And we were talking about that, hitting it off, talking about St. Louis Blues, Washington Capitals, where he was a fan of. Ended up talking the whole time into Vienna, and then I had like 40 minutes to get from one station to the next in Vienna. And he didn't have to do it with me. He's like, I'm going to go for it with you. And we were on those trams that they're on in the movie, just frantically made our way across Vienna, made it with about 2 minutes to spare. I said goodbye to him at that same station that they say goodbye, got on my train, was off, ended up, he ended up meeting up with me later on in Munich. I had some of that, some of the before sunrise magic in Vienna. Have you ever had any moments where you were like, wow, this feels like something from before sunrise?
I did have kind of a romance. It was not quite I didn't meet the guy on a train, but I wound up winning some money in Monte Carlo, and like quasi inebriated said to this American guy who me and my friend were hanging out with, said, hey, I'm going to go down to Naples for the next week before I leave. I was returning to the US after that. I was like, you want to come? And he did come. And when we were sitting on the train together, I was thinking, this is my before sunrise moment, even if it's not quite that.
He took the train from Monaco all the way to Naples with you.
He did, yeah. So we did sit on the train and have lots of conversations, but yeah, it wasn't a serendipitous meeting. It was a drunken invitation.
Okay, that still counts. It counts.
Yeah.
Any memories from those early trips that when things went wrong and now you wouldn't have it any other way and it's a cherished memory?
Well, it's the story that I wrote about in the article on Substack when I hooked up with like the weirdest collection in retrospect of people. Basically, everybody in this class that I was taking, they were all fine arts majors and they all knew each other. And then there were 6 randos, me being one of them. And we just wound up hanging out together because we didn't know any of the other people and their cliques were already formed. And so it's so funny to think about it now. We used the Let's Go guide to find our rooms. We were all in one room, 3 boys, 3 girls. Nobody hooked up either. We were really just traveling as friends. There was not even anything approaching romance whatsoever. And just we're out from morning till night, like just exploring. And we got on the subway, the metro, to go to the Coliseum. We stayed at some miserable little place by the train station, and I just remember that moment where I said, hey guys, we're going the wrong direction, everybody get off. And Matt, who had his CD Walkman on, didn't hear, and he stayed on the train, and then the doors closed. And I remember it in such a cinematic way that the doors closed, he looks up, his eyes widen, and the train just goes away in the tunnel, and we just think we'll never see him again. Because it was the 3 girls in the group who had been kind of planning and coordinating everything. We're like, we're pretty sure he has no idea where we're even staying. And we just collapsed laughing because we just thought, oh my God, we've lost him. We lost our friend. He's in the abyss forever. But of course, he just figured out how to get to the Coliseum, and we ran into him immediately once we got there.
On this viral article, I'm going to say it, You talk about in this article to embrace the not knowing. And that's what really got me, because, we just get bogged down with so many lists and so many things to do. And you're here to tell us to embrace the not knowing.
Yeah, the original impetus to write that article in 2022 is that I was getting a lot of clients who were coming to me, and this is in the post-COVID travel boom that was going on, where I had a lot of Gen X people. They were a little bit older than me. I would say people that were in their mid-50s, and they were excited to return to travel for the first time since they were young. They had kids, like their kids were all now graduating college, and the time and the money was opening up again. And I was like, I got some bad news for you. The world is different. These places are super crowded. We need to book your hotel 8 months in advance. So I was on one hand, sort of explaining how many things had changed to this, what I then called the before sunrise generation, because so many of these clients had that idea in their head as well. But then also, I was seeing people the same age who were really anxious, usually driven by their kids, about, I have to eat this sandwich, I have to do the underground tour of the Colosseum because I heard that's the best. And then I was reminding those people, hey, do you remember how you used to travel when you were young in the 90s and you just like showed up and there was people standing in the train station with a sign that had rooms for rent, and it was fine. I wasn't encouraging them to be that free-spirited, but I was trying to encourage them to detach from the idea of I have to hit a 10 best list. And so this embracing of not knowing in travel today, I mean, depending on where you're going, yeah, you're going to have to make some reservations, especially for the really famous places. You're not going to be able to just go to Paris and walk into any museum that you want. You need to have skip the line tickets now for most places. But don't be so worried about having every moment be optimized.
Tell me people aren't using that word.
Absolutely. And people are optimizing without even realizing that that's the culture that they're falling into. And they're worried that they're worried on two sides. Like, one, that they're going to fall into tourist traps. And that I feel is more legitimate, because I do feel it's a shame to have a bad meal in Italy. And actually in Florence or Rome and Venice, it's very easy to have a bad meal. And I really advocate for people making some reservations so that they don't have that experience, because that is a pity. However, you should have a lot of unoptimized time, because that's where serendipity is available to you. And if you're super overscheduled and you're waiting in line for dumb sandwiches that you saw on TikTok, you're just going to miss the freedom that you have when you travel. I mean, and even just the freedom from your schedule, the freedom from work, the fact that, a vacation is an oasis in your life where you don't have to be attached to the things that normally drive you. And so many of these social media algorithms push you into just running and not enjoying.
Another thing you talked about was rejecting FOMO and exploring your obsessions. What does explore your obsessions mean to you?
In Italy in particular, whatever your hobby or interest is, you can go so deep. So obviously food and history, that's obvious. But then what about history? Do you really want to get nerdy about ancient Rome, the Greeks, the Renaissance? I mean, any layer you can find there. You want to go into the history of fascism. I mean, there's so much to explore. Then craftsmanship, artisanship, whether it's leather making, jewelry making, the first tarot cards were invented in Italy. You can go to the early manufacturers for tarot cards, and there's all sorts of esoteric history as well. Movie history, film stuff. There you can go visit Cinecittà, the movie studio. Cinecittà is like a movie studio that's right outside of Rome, and there's all different studios, and so it's no longer active, although maybe there's still some part of it that's active, but it's mostly a museum. It's almost a theme park now. There's some rides that are associated with it, so a lot of Italian families will go there. But one of the most fun things there, and this is also interesting for people who are traveling to Italy because they want to visit Pompeii, HBO and some Italian film company, I don't know which one, had done a series in the early 2000s called Rome, and they built these sets to look like ancient Rome, and they're fantastic. And those sets are intact, and that's something that you can go visit at Cinecittà. So that's another way to take an interest in, either film or ancient Rome and put it together in an experience that, especially also too, if you're going to Rome in August where it's really hot, like Cinecittà is air conditioned. You can have the best of many worlds by making a visit there, but it's not on most people's tourist itinerary. Most people, of course, are hitting the Colosseum and the Vatican. I mean, you pick your obsession, and in just Italy, you can go so deep there. And I really encourage people to do that because, yeah, you should go see like the Vatican and the Colosseum and Michelangelo's David, sure. But often people don't even really want to see those things, or they'd be happy just walking around outside the Colosseum, which is a completely extraordinary, it's a very extraordinary experience. But they don't necessarily need to go inside if that's not where their history lies. But maybe instead investing that time or money or, getting a tour guide to take you to Cinecittà, if you're really interested in film, is a much better use of your time and is ultimately going to be so much more memorable. And, even if your obsession is coffee, go to Trieste, go to Turin, and just wander and go from coffee shop to coffee shop. It doesn't have to be a big, giant hobby or interest. It doesn't even need to be well developed. If your interest is just shopping, well, specifically, what do you like to shop for? And then go to a city that's particularly notable for that, for shoes or whatever. I'm sometimes a little bit dismayed by when I ask people what their interests are, because I'm trying to kind of drill down and make suggestions for them. They seem to draw a blank, which I can understand at first. Maybe you feel put on the spot, but sometimes people just keep going back to, oh, but I heard this is good, but I heard that is the best. And I don't know, maybe sometimes I push too far. Some people appreciate it, others don't, where I'm like, okay, but what do you want to do? What really gets you excited?
Yeah, couldn't agree more. It's like you don't have to do anything.
Yeah, you're a grown-up. You can do whatever you want. You're paying for the trip.
Yeah, and like you said, coffee, the fashion, things that some people would say, oh, it's not highbrow or whatever, but if it makes you happy, then it's worth it.
Yeah, absolutely. There's so many different layers of the world that you can decide to tune into, and especially when you're traveling, especially if you're traveling to cities. If you're going on a trip where you want to lie on a beach and relax, well, that's a different kind of a trip. But if you're going to go to a city where you're going to be schlepping around, not spending most of your time in a hotel, but there to see sights, then you really should kind of tap into something that really interests you and experience it in a deeper way. Otherwise, find a nice place to relax and make that the focal point of your vacation.
Yeah, I'd love to throw on that list too, like seeing a movie in another country.
Subtitled in English anyway.
Yeah, it's a really fun experience. What kind of snacks do they have? What are the commercials like? Just all these things. Going to the supermarket, that's another one. That's just can be an experience in its own, especially in Italy. You go back to the deli section, you can't believe the cheese and meats.
That's true, yeah.
And I'm a big sports fan. Of course, you got your soccer games.
I do encourage people, especially people going to Naples, if they're soccer fans, to go to Diego Maradona Stadium, because the Neapolitan soccer games are like unlike anything else in the world. And I'll only suggest that to certain clients because there's a certain amount of mayhem that goes along with it. But if you're open to that and you're willing to be in the spirit, that is an unforgettable experience.
So there's a qualifying question. Are you open to mayhem?
Yes. Are you comfortable with chaos?
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
Sorry for the interruption, but I just wanted to take a second to say thanks for listening to Rails, Ales, and Old Towns. I hope you're enjoying the show and it's helping you get excited for your next European adventure. Be sure to check out the episode description because that's where you'll find a link to the show notes and the show's social media info. There's also a link there where you can support the podcast by buying me a beer. Coffee, definitely a coffee. All joking aside, any support goes toward keeping the episodes flowing and the show growing. And last but not least, if you are enjoying what you're hearing and you have a spare minute, I'd be forever grateful if you were to leave a review on the platform you're listening on, as those little things really do go a long way. Back to the show.
Mind the gap between the train and the platform.
So now we need to get into Danielle Oteri's Italy. So what was it about Italy that really got you?
Well, I am Italian background. That's where all four of my grandparents are Italian immigrants. So it was always a place that was extremely familiar. Northern Italy, less so. Florence, I felt much like an American, but when I went south and then reconnected with my family there, it was very much at home. But certainly as somebody who loves history and food, there is no better country in the world than Italy. So,
Well, there's something about that art too you're enjoying as well.
I mean, every museum. I also, too, remember taking my very first art history class, Art History 101 in college, and then, to go to the big cities, to go to Florence or Paris or London and just be like, I wrote a paper on that. I remember the essay question on that. I mean, I was really using my art history class as kind of a guidebook to check off all of these things that I had studied.
You've got some philosophies that you stick by, and what I wanted to ask you about a couple of them. You've said that you're trying to get people not to go to Florence.
I am.
Explain.
Well, I love Florence. I went to graduate school in Florence. And if you are an art lover, then I think you should go to Florence. But I have far too many people come to me that say and they start off telling me up front, hey, I'm not a museum person. I don't want to, and they all say the same thing. I don't want to spend 8 hours in a museum. Well, nobody wants to spend 8 hours in a museum, even me, and I worked in museums. If you are hostile to the idea, or you just really legitimately do not want to go to museums, do not waste your time in Florence. The reason to go there is to experience great art. It's extremely crowded and it's extremely difficult to, get reservations at good places. It takes a lot of planning. It takes a lot of work to have a successful trip to Florence now. And one of the reasons it's so difficult is that there are so many people who just arrive there and stand in line for this one particular not very good sandwich, and are just checking things off the list that are really not very interested in being there. And there's so many other places where they could be spending their time and money to have a more enjoyable experience without contributing to over tourism and overcrowding of an otherwise magnificent city.
Venice is not a day trip.
Venice is not a day trip. I don't know what people are thinking with that one. Yeah, it's a small city. And part of it is the publicity around Venice is just like, get on a gondola, take a picture. That's it. But Venice was the center of the world until the Spaniards, the Portuguese routed their way to India. I mean, Venice controlled the spice trade, the textile trade. Venice was a bunch of muddy little islands, and so they had to build their entire economy on shipping and trade. And the reason it's such a beautiful city is that they had contact with all corners of the world, and there's so much to delve into there. And I would say 90% of the people that go to Venice barely scrape the surface of what's available. They don't even know what's available to them. And that's what I try to do, is I really try to tell people, because many don't, most people are not thinking about this stuff all day like I am.
Yeah.
They it's not their fault that they don't know. Why would they? They have other things to do. But again, I just think that hit and run tourism is really destructive, and I don't want people to contribute to it wittingly or unwittingly. And, if you do go there just for a day, it's not pleasant, and you'll think, oh yeah, I'm glad I didn't waste my time there. There wasn't much to see. But then as soon as you spend the night and you wake up the next morning, you say, oh my gosh, I need to spend a month here. And it's a small city. I mean, and it is built on tourism. There's only 50,000 permanent residents of Venice. I mean, everybody is there for the business of tourism. So it's not that tourism itself is destructive. It's that specific kind of, everybody's going to go to one place, take one picture, do one activity, and leave. That is what hollows out a city, because all those tour guides and restaurants that are making authentic Venetian food, all those museums, they need people for the entire city to sustain.
So what are some other places in Italy, that are close to your heart? I know you've recently mentioned Turin.
I love Turin. I think it's such an underrated city. It's almost one of those places where I don't want to talk about it too much, because the before sunrise dream is alive. The dream of the 90s is alive in Turin. You can just go from cafe to cafe and sit around and walk into a museum when you want to. Go shopping. The food is great and it's very affordable. The entire city is a world-class city that's really affordable. As somebody coming from New York, I very much appreciate that. And the art and just the city, the urban experience that's available there is incredible. And there's very few tourists. There's other European tourists. It's the experience that when people say to me, I want to go to Rome or Florence, and I want to go to some museums and see some sites, but I really want to just walk and wander and sit in cafes. I'm like, well, you're not going to be able to do it in Florence, really. Not in high season, maybe in January. But you can go do it anytime you want in Turin. So I do love Turin, but yeah, my heart is in the south. My family owns a small little resort on the Cilento coast, and that whole area is such a gem. It's directly next to the Amalfi Coast. You can see Positano and Sorrento from terrace of their resort, which is in the town of Paestum, which is famous for the 3 Greek temples, these 3,000-year-old Greek temples. You can see all those very, very famous places, but you're in a place that's quiet and where the food is fantastic. And even there's an infrastructure for tourism there. It tends to, again, be more European tourism. The 5-star hotel is family owned. Everything in the area is, for the most part, still owned by local people, high end and low, and on the lower scale, which makes it a real place. So it's often not a place is not made over touristed simply by the fact that there are too many people. But when the people who are invested in those local businesses are not local, that really can hollow out the spirit of a place. And throughout southern Italy, you still have these pockets, Cilento being one of the best, where all of the resources are still owned by local families, and they put their own culture at the fore, as they should.
Absolutely. Cilento is the name of the region.
Yeah, it's sort of a sub-region. So, region is like a state. So the region of Campania is the equivalent of like the state of California. And then there's sort of these sub-regions. So Cilento would be like saying the Hudson Valley of New York. And it's just it's directly south of the Amalfi Coast.
What is your main advice you would say to people coming to Italy?
To prioritize experience over sites, unless specifically, seeing sites is the goal of your trip. I mean, and that's a legitimate way to structure a trip. I have a client right now, it's a couple, and they said, they're in their 70s. This might be the last big international trip that they take. And they're doing part of it on a cruise ship, but they are very deliberate about the fact that they want to see the Leaning Tower of Pisa and the David, because they're not coming back. And that's a really great way for them. Their mindset about the trip, I think, is in the right direction. But if that's not your intention, and you really want to relax, or you want to have a quote unquote authentic experience, I really encourage people to think about what is the experience that you want to have. Because if you just kind of go with what you're seeing on social media, you're going to have a miserable time. I mean, these cities, and Paris falls into this category now. A lot of Spain is falling into this category. Any of the cities that have cruise ship ports are dealing with this, are so crowded. The food is not good. The service staff is burnt out. They're not enjoying their experience of life either. Everything becomes very transactional. And you're going to miss out on the best of European life, which is the slowness of it. I also encourage people, again, to sort of submit to the experience of the place where they are, especially if they're willing to go off the beaten path to a place like Cilento. Some people have so many preconceived notions about customer service, immediately moving to criticize things versus wonder why they might be different. One example is that when you sit down at a restaurant in Italy, they don't put the menu on the table right away like we expect in the US. Immediately it's like water, menu, forks, knives, boom. As a recognition that you're there, everybody's on top of things. In Italy, the idea is this is your table for the next 3 hours. Settle in, relax, have a conversation. We're not trying to rush you. We don't want to make you feel like we're on top of you, because the service model is one that, like, we're here to help you have a wonderful experience versus perform for you. So I encourage people to not immediately get their back up about an expectation that's not being met and wonder if it maybe is just out of their cultural context.
Difference is good. that's what you traveled for, difference.
That is what you travel for. And there are, unfortunately, a lot of people now who are not open to that. They want things to be a certain way. And, if you want things to be a certain way, there's also nothing wrong with that. But go to a resort or stay at a Four Seasons or a Marriott where that promise is baked into the price.
All right. So how can people, if they would like a little bit of a guidance towards a Italy trip, what's the best way to get your insights?
The best thing is to subscribe to the Substack, DanielleOteri.com, and try to write a newsletter in addition to when I can actually get a podcast produced, but that is where I'm sharing most of my information, travel tips, as well as a lot of historical information, which is what I'm the most passionate about, because I think history is such an amazing portal into travel. But I do arrange travel, and that's at DanielleOteri-Italy.com.
Thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me. I really appreciate it. And I'm really glad you discovered that article.
Thank you.